You put in the tomato plants every spring. You give them plenty of room, good soil, a cage around each one, and you wait. By August, you've got maybe 20 or 30 tomatoes off each plant if things went well. A decent harvest, nothing to complain about, but nothing that really blows you away either. Now, here is what made me rethink everything I thought I knew about growing tomatoes. About 10 years ago, I was helping my Amish neighbor Daniel tie up some plants in his garden, and I looked down and realized we were standing in a space no bigger than a large dining table, maybe 10 square feet. And in that space, there were 4 tomato plants climbing 7 feet up sturdy wooden stakes, each one loaded with fruit from about a foot off the ground all the way to the top. I stopped what I was doing and actually counted the tomatoes on one plant. I stopped counting at 60, and there were 4 plants in that little patch. I looked at him and said, "Daniel, this is more tomatoes than I get from my entire row." He just shrugged and said something I've never forgotten. "You do not give the plant choices, you give it a job." That sentence changed how I grow tomatoes. And today, I'm going to show you exactly how the Amish pull massive harvests out of tiny spaces. We're going to walk through 5 steps, and by the end, you will see how the math actually adds up to 150, even 200 tomatoes from a space most of us would not think twice about. And stick around to the end, because I am going to share the Amish planting hole recipe that Daniel used for every single tomato he ever put in the ground. It takes 2 minutes, and it gives your plants a head start that you can see within the first week. Now, before we get into the first step, I want to tell you where I was before I learned this. I grew tomatoes the way most of us do. I would space my plants 3 to 4 feet apart in a long row, put a wire cage around each one and let them do their thing. And they would bush out, sprawl through the cage, and by midsummer, I was dealing with a tangled mess of stems and leaves with fruit hidden somewhere inside that I could barely reach. I got a decent harvest, maybe 30 to 40 tomatoes per plant on a good year. But I was using a huge amount of garden space to get it, and half the fruit ended up rotting on the ground where branches sagged under their own weight. I thought that was just how tomatoes grew. It was not until I saw Daniel's vertical system that I realized I had been letting my plants waste most of their energy on leaves and sprawl instead of directing it toward fruit. So let me show you how to change that, starting with the ground those plants go into. The first step is preparing what I call an intensive bed, and this is where the whole system starts. When you are asking 4 to 6 plants to produce at this level in just 10 square feet, the soil has to be exceptional, not just good, exceptional. You are concentrating a huge amount of production into a small area, and that means the root zone needs to be packed with nutrition and biological life. Here is how to set it up. Start with a bed that is roughly 2.5 feet wide by 4 feet long, or any configuration that gives you about 10 square feet. If you have raised beds, this works perfectly. If you are growing in the ground, mark off the area and focus all your effort there. In the fall before your planting season, or at minimum 4 to 6 weeks before your last expected spring frost, work 3 to 4 inches of finished compost into the bed. Go deeper than you normally would, mixing it into the top 8 to 10 inches of soil. On top of that compost, add a 1-inch layer of well-aged manure. Horse or cow manure that has been aged at least 6 months is ideal. This adds a slow-release nitrogen source and another wave of microbial life. If you have access to leaf mold, add a 1-inch layer of that as well. Leaf mold brings the fungal component that helps roots access nutrients more efficiently, and it holds moisture in the root zone like nothing else. If you do not have leaf mold, that is fine. The compost and aged manure alone will get you most of the way there. The goal is to create a root zone so rich and biologically active that your plants never run out of what they need during the heavy production months of July and August. Daniel's beds had been built up over decades, but he still added fresh compost and manure every single fall. He told me that even the best soil needs to be fed if you are going to ask it to work this hard. If your soil is heavy clay, this intensive amendment will begin to open up the structure within the first season. If it is sandy, the organic matter will dramatically improve its ability to hold water and nutrients. Either way, you will feel the difference in your hands within a few months. But what you build above that soil is just as important as what is in it. The second step is vertical staking, and this is where the Amish approach really separates itself from how most of us grow tomatoes. Forget the wire cages. They are designed for plants that bush and sprawl, and that is exactly what we are trying to avoid. The Amish use tall, sturdy single stakes or a simple trellising system that trains each plant to grow straight up, not outward. Here is what I recommend, and this is essentially what Daniel used. Drive a wooden stake or a piece of heavy-duty rebar into the ground next to each planting spot. The stake should be 7 to 8 feet tall above the soil line, which means you need a stake that is about 8 to 9 feet total, with 12 inches buried in the ground for stability. Hardwood stakes or metal T-posts both work. The key is that they do not flex or wobble. These plants are going to be loaded with fruit by midsummer, and a flimsy stake will bend or snap. Space your stakes 18 to 24 inches apart within your 10 square foot bed in a 2.5 foot by 4 foot bed. That gives you room for 4 to 6 plants depending on the spacing you choose. I find that 4 plants at 24-inch spacing is the sweet spot for airflow and production, but if you are in a longer season zone, 7 through 9, you can push it to 5 or even 6 plants at 18-inch spacing because you have more growing time for the plants to produce before frost. As each plant grows, tie it to the stake every 8 to 10 inches using soft cloth strips, old t-shirt material, or garden twine. Do not use wire or anything that can cut into the stem. The tie should be firm enough to support the plant, but loose enough to allow the stem to thicken naturally. You are training each plant to grow as a single column of production, not a bush. All the energy goes up, all the fruit forms along that central column, and nothing touches the ground. Another method that works beautifully in a small space is the Florida weave, which the Amish use extensively in their market gardens. You set your stakes at each end and between every 2 plants, then weave a single line of heavy garden twine along both sides of the row at 8-inch intervals as the plants grow. The twine sandwiches the plants between 2 lines and supports them without individual tying. It is faster to set up and works especially well when you have 4 or more plants in a line. Either method accomplishes the same goal. Your plants grow vertically, the fruit is accessible and off the ground, air circulates freely around the foliage, which reduces disease, and you are using vertical space instead of horizontal space. Daniel's plants reached 7 feet by midsummer, and they were still producing at the top when the first frost came. Standing next to them felt like being in a green wall covered in tomatoes. Now, growing vertically is only half of the equation. The other half, and this is the part that felt completely wrong to me the first time I saw it, is what you remove from the plant. That brings us to the third step. The third step is pruning. And I will be honest with you, this is the step that most gardeners resist. It was the hardest one for me to accept. The first time I watched Daniel prune his tomatoes, I thought he was destroying them. He walked down the row with a sharp pair of shears and he removed what looked like half the plant, side shoots, lower branches, leaves below the first fruit cluster, all of it gone. I stood there watching him strip these beautiful bushy green plants down to a single main stem with a few branches and fruit clusters, and everything in me wanted to say, Daniel, stop, you are killing them. But I did not say anything because I had seen his harvest, and his harvest was 3 times mine. Here is what he was doing and why it works. Indeterminate tomato plants, which are the type the Amish grow for this method, have a natural habit of producing suckers. A sucker is a new shoot that sprouts in the V-shaped joint, where a side branch meets the main stem. If you leave that sucker, it grows into a whole new stem with its own branches and its own fruit. That sounds like a good thing. More stems means more tomatoes, right? Actually, no. Every sucker you leave diverts energy away from the main stem. The plant spreads itself thin, trying to feed all those extra branches. The fruit gets smaller. There is more of it in theory, but much of it never fully ripens before frost. And all that extra foliage creates a dense canopy where moisture gets trapped, airflow stops, and fungal diseases like early blight and septoria leaf spot thrive. What Daniel did was prune each plant to either 1 or 2 main leaders. 1 leader means you remove every single sucker and let the plant put all its energy into a single vertical stem. 2 leaders means you allow 1 strong sucker near the base to develop into a second stem, and you remove everything else. Either way, you are focusing the plant's energy like a laser. Instead of producing 100 small half-ripe tomatoes scattered across a sprawling bush, the plant produces 40 to 60 full-sized, fully ripe tomatoes on a single vertical column that you can reach without bending over or digging through a jungle of leaves. Here is exactly how to do it. Starting when your plant is about 12 to 18 inches tall, check the leaf axils every week. That is the joint where a side branch meets the main stem. When you see a sucker forming there, and it will look like a tiny new stem with small leaves growing out of the joint, pinch it off with your fingers when it is 2 to 3 inches long. At that size, it snaps off cleanly and the wound heals fast. If you let a sucker get bigger than about 4 inches, use clean shears to cut it rather than tearing it, which can damage the main stem. Also remove all leaves and branches below the lowest fruit cluster. Those lower leaves are not contributing much to photosynthesis by midsummer, but they are in contact with the soil where blight spores splash up during rain. Removing them improves airflow at the base of the plant and dramatically reduces disease pressure. I prune my tomatoes every week, usually during the morning walk. It takes about 2 minutes per plant. It feels aggressive at first, especially when you are holding a healthy looking branch in your hand that you just cut off. But within a couple of weeks, you will see the difference. The fruit that remains gets bigger. It ripens faster. And the plant looks clean, open, and healthy instead of overgrown. Daniel used to say that pruning is not about taking away. It is about telling the plant where to put its strength. That is a principle the Amish apply to a lot of things beyond gardening, and it works. Now, what I have shared with you so far is a real piece of the puzzle, but it is still just one piece. If you want the complete system laid out day by day so you know exactly what to do and when, I would really encourage you to check out the guide I put together. It is called the 30-Day Amish Pest-Proof Garden Protocol, and it is everything I have learned from my Amish neighbors over the last 3 decades, organized into a simple plan you can start this season. It covers the full 5 defense layers to build a garden that defends itself from the soil up. It has got the complete 4-bed crop rotation system that stops disease and pests before they ever get a foothold, and it includes a companion planting field guide so you know exactly what to grow next to what and why. You can click the link right down there in the description below this video, or if you're watching this on your TV or your computer, just grab your phone, open up the camera, and point it at the QR code on screen right now. It'll take you straight to the guide. No searching, no typing anything in. All right, let's keep going. Now, the 4th step is choosing the right varieties, and this matters more than most people realize. Not all tomato plants are built for this system. You need indeterminate varieties, which means plants that keep growing and producing fruit continuously throughout the season until frost kills them. Determinate varieties, by contrast, grow to a fixed height, produce all their fruit in a concentrated window, and then they are done. Determinates have their place, but for this intensive vertical method, you want the plants that never stop. Here are the varieties Daniel grew and the ones I have had the best results with. Brandywine is an heirloom indeterminate that produces large, meaty, incredibly flavorful fruit. It is not the heaviest producer, but the quality is outstanding, and each fruit is substantial. Cherokee Purple is another heirloom that does well vertically with rich, complex flavor and good disease resistance for an heirloom. San Marzano is a paste-type indeterminate that produces heavy clusters of elongated fruit. And if you are counting total tomatoes, San Marzano is hard to beat because of how prolifically it sets fruit. Rutgers is an older variety that the Amish in my area have grown for generations. It is reliable, productive, and handles heat well. For shorter season areas, zones 4 and 5 especially, look for early girl or stupus, which are indeterminate varieties that start producing earlier and give you more time before frost. The key is to plant varieties, perform in your specific zone, and to avoid the temptation to grow too many different types in a small space. In a 10 square foot bed with 4 plants, I recommend 2 of your best main crop variety and 2 of a heavy producer like San Marzano. That gives you a mix of quality and quantity that adds up fast. The 5th step is the one that takes you from a good harvest to a remarkable one. Succession planting. Most of us plant all our tomatoes on the same day in late spring and hope for the best. The problem is that all those plants mature at roughly the same time, produce heavily for a few weeks, and then slow down as they age and the fruit load accumulates. You get a glut in August and then not much after that. The Amish stagger their plantings. Daniel did not put all his tomatoes in the ground at once. He planted his first wave about 2 weeks after the last expected frost, then planted a second wave 2 to 3 weeks later, and sometimes a third wave 2 to 3 weeks after that. Each wave was started from seed indoors or sourced as transplants, so they were ready to go into the ground at the right time. What this does is create overlapping production windows. Your first wave is producing heavily in July and early August. Your second wave hits its stride in August and September, and if you have a third wave, it carries you right up to first frost. In zones 7 through 9, where the growing season is long, 3 waves is very achievable. In zones 5 and 6, 2 waves is more realistic. In zone 4, you can still do 2 waves if you start your second round indoors early and use season extending techniques like row covers. Here is where the math comes together. One well-pruned indeterminate plant on a vertical stake in deeply enriched soil can produce 40 to 60 tomatoes over a full season. 4 plants in your 10 square foot bed gives you 160 to 240 in a single wave. If you are succession planting with even 2 waves using the same bed by replacing spent early plants or using a second small bed, you extend that production across the entire season. Daniel's approach was slightly different. He kept 4 plants going in that small space all season and simply managed them so intensively that they never slowed down. His weekly pruning, consistent watering, and that extraordinary soil kept the plants producing at their peak much longer than mine ever did without the system. My best year was about 180 tomatoes from a 10 square foot bed. Daniel consistently hit 200. The difference was his decades of built up soil and his discipline with the weekly pruning. I am still catching up. Now let me share some patterns I've noticed in conventional tomato growing and how the Amish approach handles things differently. The first pattern is using wire cages and letting plants bush out. Cages are convenient, but they encourage exactly the sprawling growth that limits production. The plant spreads in every direction, energy is divided among dozens of stems, and much of the fruit ends up shaded, small, or resting on the ground where it rots. The Amish stake and train vertically, which concentrates energy and keeps every tomato off the ground and in the light. The second pattern is never pruning suckers. Most home gardeners let every sucker grow because more growth looks like more production. But what you actually get is more leaves, more disease, and smaller, slower ripening fruit. The Amish prune aggressively because they know that fewer, stronger stems produce more usable fruit than a dozen weak ones. The third pattern is planting everything on the same day. A single planting date means a single harvest window with a peak and a decline. Succession planting extends that window across months and evens out the harvest, so you are never overwhelmed and never without tomatoes. The fourth pattern is spacing plants too far apart out of habit. Conventional spacing of 3 to 4 feet between plants makes sense for sprawling bushes, but when you are growing vertically and pruning to a single leader, 18 to 24 inches is plenty. You are using the vertical space above, not the horizontal space around. None of these conventional approaches will ruin your garden. They are just leaving production on the table. Adding the Amish layer of vertical staking, focused pruning, and succession timing to what you already know can double or triple your harvest from the same amount of space. Now here is the planting hole recipe I promised you at the beginning. This is something Daniel did for every single tomato he planted, and it is so simple I almost did not believe it would make a difference. Before you set your transplant, dig the hole about twice as wide and twice as deep as the root ball. Into the bottom of that hole, add 2 generous handfuls of finished compost, 1 tablespoon of bone meal, and 1 tablespoon of crushed eggshells that you have saved and dried over the winter. Mix those into the soil at the bottom of the hole with your fingers. Then set your transplant deep, burying the stem up to the lowest set of leaves. Tomatoes will root along any buried stem, so planting deep gives you a much larger root system right from the start. Fill in around the plant with a mix of your native soil and a little more compost. Water it in well and mulch around the base with 3 to 4 inches of straw, leaving a 2-inch gap around the stem. That bone meal provides slow-release phosphorus for root development and fruiting. The eggshells add calcium, which helps prevent blossom end rot, one of the most common frustrations in tomato growing. And the extra compost gives the roots immediate access to rich, biologically active material right where they need it most. I've been doing this for about 8 years now, and the difference in early growth is visible within the first week. Plants that get this treatment establish faster, flower sooner, and set fruit more heavily than ones planted without it. It takes about 2 minutes per hole and costs almost nothing. Give it a try this spring and see for yourself. Now, what I've shared with you today is a real piece of the puzzle, but it's still just one piece. If you're tired of fighting the same battles every season, if you want a garden that actually works with you instead of against you, then I'd really encourage you to check out the guide I put together. It's called the 30-Day Amish Pest-Proof Garden Protocol, and it's everything I've learned from my Amish neighbors over the last 3 decades, organized into a simple day-by-day plan you can start this season. It covers the full 5 defense layers to build a garden that defends itself from the soil up. It's got the complete 4-bed crop rotation system that stops disease and pests before they ever get a foothold, and it includes a companion planting field guide so you know exactly what to grow next to what and why. Now, there are 2 easy ways to grab it. The first way is to click the link in the description right below this video. Just scroll down a little and you'll see it. The second way, if you're watching on a television or a computer screen, is to take out your phone, open up your camera like you're going to take a picture, and hold it up to the QR code you see on screen right now. A little link will pop up at the top of your phone screen. Just tap that, and it'll bring you right to the guide. No typing, no searching. Either way works. I think it's the best investment you can make in your garden this year. That is what I have learned from my Amish neighbors about growing more tomatoes in less space than I ever thought possible. I still remember standing in Daniel's garden that first time, counting the fruit on a single plant and realizing I'd been thinking about tomato growing all wrong. It was not about giving the plant more room. It was about giving it a job and everything it needed to do that job well. If any of this changed how you think about your tomato patch, I would love to hear about it in the comments. And if you have a variety or a technique that has worked well for you over the years, share it. We all learn from each other. Thanks for spending time with me today, and I will see you in the next one.